This is a lecture from OpenTuition. To benefit from the lecture, you should download the free lecture notes from opentuition.com.
In this chapter, we continue our appraisal of internal matters. And first we look at the value chain, or Porter's value chain. Now what Porter did was he essentially set out on a diagram all the activities that companies undertake. And along the bottom we have what Porter called the primary activities. These are fairly like what you might call direct costs, or even variable costs. Not purely, but it's a reasonable guide. So inbound logistics is the physical, really the physical acquisition of raw material or components. Within physical acquisition, we have to look at, do we go and get the goods? Does a supplier supply the goods? Are we making them ourselves in a different division, or is it subcontracted? Do we bring them into our premises and put them in a warehouse, and only when they're needed on the production line are they taken from the warehouse and put onto the production line, or is it more a just-in-time sort of a system? So there's quite a bit of potential choice there. We could use logistics companies to bring in the goods, or we could use our own transport to bring in the goods, and the like. Next we have operations, which is basically the production process. And the operations could be done ourselves, or we could subcontract it. Again, there's choice within that. Although we tend to be thinking about a value chain in only looking at production of products, it can also be applied to the delivery of service. So if you are in a hotel, we have to decide how we're going to deliver the operations in the hotel. Is it, or in the hotel chain, is it going to be a series of franchises to independent hoteliers who are all branded on our name, or is it going to be our own hotels and so on? Who's, for example, is going to do maybe the maintenance and the cleaning? Is it our own staff or subcontracted? So a lot of different ways in which the operations, we've got choice about them. Outbound logistics. Outbound logistics is basically getting goods to the customers. Again, a choice. We could use post, we could use courier services, logistics companies. We could distribute via a retail outlet, via another shop. We could get people to come to us and pick up the goods. So again, a lot of choice as to exactly how the outbound logistics is going to work. Next we have sales and marketing. How do we, advertise ourselves to customers? How do we get new customers? How do we find out what customers want? How do we generate sales? And of course, you'll understand that the internet has a huge role potentially to play in sales and marketing. And finally, there is services, or are services. And this is really anything which happens after the main sale event. And it can be maintenance. It could be actual service, kind of repairs, if you like. It could be installation. And it could be training. I'll put the training up here. And very often these service activities or processes, training, maintenance, repairs and installation, they can earn really as much, or not more, than the sale of the basic product itself. So how are we going to do it? How are we going to do, for example, repairs on the products we send to our customers? Again, we could have our own engineers who could go out. Or what we could do is to get into a kind of subcontracting arrangements with other engineers and maintenance people local to where the customers actually are. Similarly, installation, is it ourselves, is it subcontractor? Training, is it going to be face-to-face, or is it going to be like this over the internet? So huge variety and choice again that has to be made by the company. Along the top, we have what are called the secondary or support, usually called support actually, support activities. So firm infrastructure, think of that as head office. For example, how's the accounting system being organised? Is it being done centrally, or does each of the subsidiaries have its own accounts payable and the like? Technology development is basically research and development. And these are done kind of horizontally because the technology development could be involved in improving inbound logistics operations, outbound logistics, sales and marketing and service, so they can span all of the primary activities. There is human resource management, your HR, and within human resource management there is deciding what sort of people do we need, what sort of training are we going to give them, what sort of career path are we going to give them, what sort of pay and conditions are we going to give people, so we get people of the right standard and caliber, but not too expensive, presumably, to carry out inbound logistics operations, sales, marketing, repairs, training, and so on. And the final one we have in here is procurement. And rather curiously, I always think, Porter splits procurement from inbound logistics. Inbound logistics is the physical receipt of goods. Procurement is really the ordering of goods or the acquisition of non-current assets. How do we go about the process of finding a supplier who can provide the goods at the right price, at the right quality, and on time? Are we going to have one supplier, for example, to whom we sell all of our orders and maybe get a very good deal out of them? Or do we prefer to split our orders maybe amongst 4 suppliers so we can play one off against the other in terms of cost and quality? Now the aim of all this activity, or all these activities, is to get profit, and this line at the end here, profit or margin, as it says down here. And what we have to do, if we're going to be a successful company, is to arrange our activities so that it generates profit. And to do that, you have to actually add value. Because Porter kind of said, look, you could have all of these activities. The activities cost money. So let's say the total cost is, let's say, 10 million. So if you add up all the costs of these activities or processes, it's going to cost us 10 million. And let's say our revenue is 14 million. And Porter said, isn't that slightly almost magical that you spend 10 million and in exchange for that expenditure other people give you 14 million? That doesn't seem logical. Why would they give you 14 million for something they know only costs 10 million? Because they will see the financial statements. They know your profit. They know your cost. And Porter says they must be willing to spend over the cost to give you profit, because you are doing something either they can't do or don't want to do, or can't do as well or as cheaply. So maybe one of the reasons that they're willing to give you 14 million is within your operations you have a lot of know-how, and they simply can't replicate the know-how. They simply don't have the knowledge to do that, or maybe they have a unique resource. Maybe you have a unique resource, you own a particular patent, and that actually prevents your customers carrying out that operation. Maybe they think what you're doing is very risky, and rather than undertake that risk themselves, they say, well, we'd rather pay you to undertake that risk if it's removing asbestos from the building or something of that sort. And maybe what you're actually doing is bringing economies of scale. So let's say your customer wanted 10% of your output. Okay? So 10% of your output is going to be 1.4 million. But if you set up a factory to produce 10% of the output, almost certainly it's going to cost over 1 million. Because by and large, as factories get larger and there's more automation, and the supplier can ask for better discounts from their suppliers and so on there, you can begin to work the plant and machinery not just 8 hours a day but maybe 24 hours a day and so on. As you get bigger, you get these economies of scale. The reverse is true. If you say I'm going to operate at a tenth of your scale, almost certainly your costs are not going to be as low as a tenth of the overall costs. So what might actually happen is if you were to try to do this yourself, you would be thinking there, well, rather than paying 1.4 million, I will kind of do 10% of this undertaking, but 10% of the undertaking might actually come to 1.6 million. It's not going to go down to 1 million. So what your customer might be buying into is your vast efficiency. You've got these huge, fast, efficient machines, big factories, and because you're operating in such a big way, maybe specializing in something, you can do something far more efficiently than they can, and that's why they're willing to give you the money. So, Porter said you have to almost dig down into your subconscious almost and say, I really needed to understand why customers come to me, why customers are willing to pay a good price, and we meddle with that at our peril, really. Porter also said that what we need to understand is a kind of linkage between these various factors. So you could well argue, I think, here, that if you did a bit of technology development, so if we maybe improved that, if we spent a little bit of money in here, then maybe what we'd be able to achieve is saving some money out here. So what we do is we invest in a very good website, and a very good website is collecting information which is useful for marketing and sales and will send people marketing emails automatically and so on. Provided your customers don't mind that and they don't feel they're being shortchanged really by being approached by a website rather than a salesperson, this could well increase your profit. Similarly, it might be worthwhile spending a bit more on your human resource management in training. So you recruit better people, train them better and so on. They're going to make fewer errors. And we might find that what that's going to do is to reduce the cost of operations because there's less wastage or people are working faster. And it might also reduce some stuff over here. If the goods are produced better, to a better quality, then maybe they require fewer repairs, fewer service calls, if you like, at the end of the day. So the value chain kind of tries to explain to people or gets people to understand where do they add value, what is it that their customers really treasure, what do we have to keep doing well. The next slide simply recognizes that by and large companies don't stand alone. They do very rarely do they take raw materials kind of growing in the fields, so to speak, do something with those raw materials and sell those personally to the customers. Modern economies have networks basically of buyers and suppliers. So if you took a company like Apple, we know Apple makes very good iPads, phones, computers and so on there. Apple, of course, doesn't make all its own goods. Apple is dependent, for example, on Intel. And Intel itself has got basically a little value chain kind of within it. Intel would be thinking, where am I getting my raw materials from? How much am I spending on technology development? How much am I spending on training? What's the most efficient way for me to get this to Apple or to Apple's customers, and so on. A supplier too might be essentially a company which does the assembly. So what Apple is kind of doing is, instead of really assembling machinery itself, products itself, it outsources that usually to assembly companies in the Far East and so on. And it says that is the most efficient way of doing it because they've got huge assembly plants there. They've become very efficient at assembling this, and that's the way I get value. They have to decide as they're going through logistics and so on, but this assembly company will have its own little kind of value chain going on in here. It requires raw materials. How do we get the components maybe from Intel? How do we get the finished goods either to Apple or to Apple shops? What are the operations? To what extent are they going to be automated? Are we going to do it 24/7, or are we going to have shorter working time and so on? So each of these suppliers is itself adding value. If it didn't, Apple would do it itself. And similarly, when we think about the output from Apple, well, we know there's a number of different ways of doing it. Apple can sell directly. You have Apple shops. And why would Apple have shops? Well, again, there's going to be a little kind of value chain within the shop there. And the sort of things that the shop is going to be very good at is maybe giving advice on the service part of it. It can obviously do the selling, but of course you've got your Apple geniuses there who will maybe give advice, help you set up your machine and the like. And they will be thinking, what sort of people do we need to train? They need to be thinking, what will the shop look like? And we know they look very kind of smart and so on. That's part of the operations, that when you go into an Apple shop, it feels good. Or, of course, it might go through a distributor. It might be selling Apple products through, for example, Amazon. And for some people who maybe don't live near an Apple shop, that is going to be the way Apple adds value by really concentrating not so much on giving help and assistance, but on delivering their goods to people with very little bother, making it convenient for people. So at the end of the day, what the consumers are paying for, or willing to pay for, is a kind of accumulation of all the value that's been put in so far. So the value that Intel puts in, the value that the assembly company puts in, the value that Apple puts in terms of the design and the style of the products, the value that might come by visiting an Apple store and getting advice. At the end of the day, that's the sum of that really is what you're going to be paying for. Finally, on this chapter, we have to look at what's called portfolio analysis. And this is the BCG matrix, and BCG is the Boston Consulting Group. As the name suggests, it's a firm of management consultants, presumably originally based on Boston, but now worldwide. And to do this, it says portfolio analysis is only going to make sense, and in a question you only do it if you have several products, or perhaps divisions making several different products. But a portfolio means a list, really. And BGC was giving some guidance as to maybe what we should be doing with these products, how we should be looking after them and so on. And what it looked at was market or industry growth rate, how much is the total market growing, and your market share, your relative market share, and relative market share is your market share over the largest. So it's your market share over the largest market share, relative market share. So this can never be more than 1. If you are the largest market, largest or have the largest market share, this fraction will come down to 1. So we'll talk you kind of through it, and then we'll kind of see that there might be potentially some little difficulties with it. None of these models will give you a correct answer immediately, or may not give you a correct answer. They will give you some guidance there, but no model can really take into account all the potential complexities that happen in real life. All a model really does is to say it helps you to set out your information, to organize it, and it's a bit better than just starting with a blank sheet of paper. So, first of all, we start here. Question mark or problem child. So here we have a product whose market is growing strongly. So this means that it's a good product to be in. Okay, so we want to be in that market because if the market is growing strongly, it's probably a new market and has got a decent future. Okay, so we want to be there. However, what BCG says is that if you have a low market share, it says that you can't survive there long term, because if you have got like a 3% market share and other people are up like 20% market share, they are so much more economically powerful, they can just kind of click their fingers and you're gone. They can just drop their prices for 6 months and you can't stand it. They can spend a bit more on research and development or on advertising and you won't be able to match it. So BCG, it's a bit big is beautiful. It says you have to decide, and the question is, do we get out? Even though it's a desirable market, we're such a small player, there's no future, so cut our losses and get out. Or are we going to spend money and go up there? And what it requires, of course, is spending money. So this is, if we decide to go up here, it's cash negative. Because you're spending money either on advertising or bringing out a new version of the product or cutting your selling price to grab market share. But it's going to be expensive. What they're saying there is that you want to build. You want to build a product, in particular you want to build a market share so you become a significant player, ideally the biggest one. Assuming we succeed and we go up here, well, what's known as a star product, and stars are not as good as they sound. A star product has a high market share, there's a high growth rate, and this is said to be cash neutral. And it's cash neutral because if you are top of the tree, if you're the company with the highest market share, then all the other companies down here who've got small market shares have got you in their sights, and they keep having special promotions to try to grab market share. They drop their selling price and so on. So what you're having to do, even though your volume is quite high here with a high market share, is to defend your predominant position here, your preeminent position here. So you still have to spend a lot on promotion and bringing out new editions of the product and so on, maybe responding to price cuts that these upstarts down here are putting through. And the strategic kind of imperative here is to hold. But it's hold in the sense that you would hold a castle or hold a defensive position. You're defending yourself against these question mark companies trying to assail your market. At some point, all highly growing markets are going to tail off. So after 5 years or whatever it's going to be, everyone has one of these products, or the popularity of the product has fallen, or the product has been superseded by a new product or something. So we're inevitably going to go down here. High growth rate goes to low pedestrian growth rate. And this is where, as the name suggests, it's going to be cash positive. And it's cash positive because we have a high market share, so you get economies of scale. By the time 5 years have elapsed, or whatever the period is. We've probably expensed all our machinery. It's probably all kind of depreciated and so on. We're way down a learning curve, so whatever we're doing, we're going to be doing really quite efficiently. We're like a well-oiled machine now. But importantly, if you're down here with a low industry growth rate, no other company is going to really attack that market. Why would you, as a company, attack a market which is past its peak, where it's basically stagnating, the market growth rate is low, and probably the next stage is that market is actually going to wither away and decline. All the other companies have got their eyes firmly fixed up here on the newish high growth rate products. So the great thing about down here is substantially they leave you alone. You've got this old product and it kind of just ticks along, really, like being on the back burner. You don't have to keep promoting it as much and so on. You're working very efficiently at high volume, and this is when the cash really comes in. The final quadrant is a dog, and this doesn't go down to a dog. A dog is just going to go nowhere. You didn't have a high market share. It's a product with a low growth rate. Get out of it. There is no point in you trying to gain a high market share in an old product, a product that's had it, a product which is past its peak and so on. There are better places to spend your money. What the portfolio bit kind of begins to say is that it's nice to have a balanced portfolio. If you have lots and lots and lots of products in this quadrant, in your problem child quadrant, they're all needing lots and lots of money spending on them to promote them up to the star quadrant. And you probably haven't got enough money to work on all of those products. What's going to happen if all your products are down here in cash cow is you're doing well this year, but what's going to happen in 2, 3, 4, 5 years' time when these products really have had it, they really have declined and nobody really wants to buy them at all, and you have not been bringing anything through the process of new products. What it says is it's nice is if you have some old products which are producing the cash, and you can use this cash to nurture and develop and to bring on, to promote and to gain a high market share on the new products where there's a high growth rate, because you need these new products to give you sustained competitive advantage. A couple of things just to worry about here. BCG doesn't say really where high market growth rate and low market growth rate actually fall. So that's, slightly arbitrary. It's going to put your quadrants slightly arbitrary. Secondly, there is this kind of emphasis of big is beautiful. You have to have a big market share here before you get into the star and the cash cow here. But the car company with one of the highest profitabilities per car is Porsche. Now Porsche, of course, if you compare it to General Motors and Ford and Nissan and Toyota and VW and so on there, Porsche's got a tiny market share, yet it has been very successful long term. And the problem is that you can misread what your market is. Porsche's market is not all cars. Porsche's market is a smaller niche market in which performance cars, luxury cars and so on, in which it's going to be a significant performer and have a significant market share. So we need to be careful on how to define your market. Otherwise, we're going to be getting misinterpretations, really, of which quadrant you're in. And finally, I'll say that interpreting this too much of a binary kind of black and white way is wrong. So let's say we have decided that the cutoff between low industry growth rate and high industry growth rate is 10%. And here we have a product where the 10.1 for that product is the industry growth rate, and in another product where it's 9.9. It would obviously not be right when the growth rate falls from 10.1 to 9.9 to suddenly stop promoting as much, suddenly stop freshening the product, and so on. Suddenly to feel safe that no one is going to attack that product with their own products and so on there. So this very kind of black and white approach is wrong. It's more of a gradual change from very attractive high growth rate products into very unattractive, very low growth products. But there is, very much a kind of grey area kind of in here as maybe products transition from one category to another. So it's a guide, but you have to think whether or not the answers it gives should be followed without question.